In the year 408, a barbarian army stood at the gates of Rome. The Visigoth king Alaric had the greatest city in the world by the throat, its people starving inside their own walls, and he named his price to let them live. Gold, 5,000 pounds of it, 30,000 pounds of silver, 4,000 silk tunics, 3,000 scarlet-dyed hides, and then, alongside the treasure of an empire, one more demand that should stop you cold. 3,000 pounds of pepper. Sit with that, a warlord who could ask for anything on earth, and part of what he wanted, weighed out beside the gold, was the dried fruit of a vine that grew on a hillside thousands of miles away in southern India. Because in that world, pepper was not a seasoning. It was money. It was status. It came from so far away, through so many hands, that owning it meant owning a piece of the edge of the known world, and almost all of it came from one place. So here is the question this whole video is built to answer. Why India? Why did one country become the source the entire planet would bankrupt itself, sail into the unknown, and slaughter for? You probably think you already know. India is hot. It's tropical. Things grow there. And that feels like enough of an answer, right up until you look at a map. The whole equatorial belt is hot and wet. The Amazon, the Congo Basin, the islands of Southeast Asia. None of them became the country that emperors taxed themselves over and kings demanded as ransom. Heat and rain are everywhere on this planet. This happened in exactly one place, and it gets stranger because it isn't even one spice. Go open your kitchen cupboard right now. Black pepper, cardamom, turmeric, cumin, ginger, chili, cinnamon, coriander, fenugreek. A staggering share of what's in there traces back to a single country. India grows 75 of the 109 spices the world officially recognizes, not a handful of them, the clear majority. So the real mystery was never why India has a lot of one thing. It's why one country ended up holding almost the entire rack. I'm going to answer that completely, and I'm going to take you somewhere darker than you expect, because the story of why India has so many spices is also the story of how those spices got more people killed than almost any crop in human history. Over the next 20 minutes, I'll walk you through it in 3 stages. First, the real reason one country grows nearly everything, which is older and stranger than climate. Second, the blood. The empires that bankrupted, burned and conquered to reach it. And third, the lie. The story you've been told about why anyone wanted these spices at all, which turns out to be almost completely false. And I'm going to leave 3 questions open as we go, so hold on to them. Number 1. There is exactly one place on Earth where pepper still grows truly wild, and I'll show you where, because it explains everything. Number 2. One tiny spice island was once traded straight up for the island of Manhattan, and the people who gave away Manhattan thought they had won the better deal. And number 3. India ruled the world's pepper for 3,000 years, and today it is not even in the top 3. I'll tell you what happened to the crown at the very end. Stay with me, because all 3 of those threads tie back to the same coastline. Let's start with the scale of it, because the present tells you how deep this runs. India today produces close to 40% of the world's spices. It is, at the same time, the largest producer, the largest consumer, and the largest exporter of spices on the planet, shipping to nearly 200 countries and earning more than $4.5 billion a year doing it. It grows around 80% of the world's turmeric. It is the genetic home of more spices than any other nation. Whole cities are named for single spices. Guntur in the south is called the Chili City, and its market is the largest chili yard in Asia. Erode is called the Turmeric City. One country, a spice for nearly every kitchen on the planet. So the obvious question is, how? How does a single nation end up growing a spice for almost every cuisine on Earth? And to answer that, I have to take you back, not hundreds of years, millions. This is stage one. The reason India grows so many spices comes down to three forces, stacked one on top of the other, and the first one happened before there were humans to taste anything. Run the clock back far enough and India is not even attached to Asia. It is a separate landmass, drifting north across the ocean after breaking away from the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. When it finally slams into the underside of Asia, it crumples the crust upward and throws up the Himalayas, the highest mountains on the planet. And along its own western edge, it leaves a long, green spine of mountains called the Western Ghats. Then, roughly 10 million years ago, the climate shifts. The monsoon over this region intensifies and becomes reliable. Year after year, warm, wet air drives off the ocean and slams into those slopes, and on them grows a band of dense, dripping rainforest. That rainforest is one of the 8 richest concentrations of life on the entire planet. And here is the first open loop paying off already. It is the only place on Earth where black pepper still grows truly wild. The single most traded spice in human history, the thing Alaric demanded and Rome went broke for, has exactly one wild home, and it is that mountain range. India did not learn to grow pepper. India is where pepper comes from. Those same hills are the native home of cardamom, of ginger, of the turmeric that colors half the dishes in Asia. To this day, a single research institute in the south guards the largest collection of pepper varieties on Earth, around 3,000 distinct types, alongside more than 1,000 kinds of turmeric. That is not a country that imported its spices. That is a country sitting on the genetic source code. But native pepper and cardamom do not explain a rack of 75 different spices. This does, and it is the second force. India is not one climate. It is 15 climates crammed into one country. Think about what that means. The wet, tropical south grows the vine and tree spices, the pepper, cardamom, ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, and clove. Now swing northwest into the dry plains of Rajasthan and Gujarat, and the whole world changes. The land turns arid and harsh, and that is exactly what the seed spices want: the cumin, the coriander, the fennel, the fenugreek. Then climb into the eastern Himalayas, into the cold of Sikkim, and you get large cardamom that grows almost nowhere else. Go higher still, into the mountains of Kashmir, and the same country that grows tropical pepper now grows the single most expensive spice on Earth, saffron. India has a spice for every climate because India contains nearly every climate. No other nation packs that range of growing conditions inside one set of borders. And then there is the third force, the one almost everyone misses. India did not only grow spices, it sat directly on the wind highway of the ancient world, halfway between the spice islands of the Far East, the only place cloves and nutmeg grew, and the hungry markets of the West. Everything passed through India, and India did something with what passed through. It absorbed it. Foreign spices arrived on foreign ships and were planted, bred, and folded into Indian soil and Indian cooking, until the world forgot they were ever foreign. The chili is the perfect proof, and it answers a question you might already be asking. The chili that defines Indian food, the heat in every curry, is not Indian at all. It is a New World crop. It did not exist anywhere in Asia until Portuguese ships carried it from Brazil around 500 years ago. In one Indian language, they still call it kapal mulagu, which means the pepper that came in the ship. Within a few decades, it had been bred into Indian fields and built into Indian cooking so completely that today the entire world thinks of it as the most Indian flavor there is. That is the Crossroads in action. The world's spices did not just pass through India, they became Indian. So that is the answer to the question in the title. Native plants no one else had, every climate under one flag, and the position of a crossroads that swallowed the rest of the world's spices and made them its own. Three forces, stacked. That is why India has so many spices. Now let me show you what that abundance cost. because this is stage 2, and from here the story gets very dark. Go back to Rome. The same monsoon wind that watered those hills also carried the ships. By the 1st century, sailors had learned to ride the southwest monsoon straight across the open ocean, from the Red Sea to the Indian coast, over 1,000 miles of empty water in about 40 days, then turn around and ride the winter monsoon home. Greek and Roman writers even gave that wind a name, the Hippolus wind, after a navigator who may be half legend. And suddenly India was not a rumor at the end of 100 middlemen. It was 40 days of open sea and a fortune waiting on the far side, and Rome could not get enough. The Roman writer Pliny complained that India was draining his empire of 50 million sesterces every single year just for pepper and luxuries. To put a human face on that number, a Roman soldier earned around 900 sesterces a year. So Rome was sending India the lifetime wages of 50,000 soldiers annually and getting back dried berries and aromatics. Romans started calling India the sink of the world's precious metals because the gold went in and never came back. And we know the scale was real because one ancient document survived to prove it. It is called the Muziris Papyrus, and it records the cargo of a single ship, the Hermopollon, returning from a single Indian port. That one shipload, more than 500 tons of pepper and ivory and aromatics, was valued at over 9 million sesterces. With the money from one ship, you could have bought a prime country estate in Italy several times over. One ship. And the ships came every year. There is a Roman cookbook that survived from this period, and by some counts it reaches for pepper and Indian spice in roughly 350 of its 500 recipes. This was not seasoning. It was an addiction with a balance of payments crisis attached, which is how we get back to where we started, with Alaric at the gates demanding his 3,000 pounds of pepper. By then, pepper was so embedded in the European mind as stored wealth that people paid rent in it. We still have the phrase peppercorn rent, and in the year 410, 2 years after that ransom, Alaric sacked Rome anyway. We're a third of the way in, and the trade only gets bloodier from here. For the next 1,000 years, the pepper reached Europe through a long chain of Arab and Venetian middlemen who guarded the source like a state secret, spreading stories that the spices grew in valleys crawling with serpents. Then, in 1453, the Ottomans took Constantinople and choked the overland routes, and spice prices in Europe reportedly jumped several times over. That price shock is the real engine behind the age of exploration. Europe did not sail off the edge of the map out of curiosity. It sailed to cut out the middlemen and seize the source. And here is one of the great accidents of history. When Christopher Columbus sailed west in 1492, he was not looking for a new world. He was looking for a shortcut to Indian pepper. He hit the Caribbean instead, found a hot red pod the locals ate, and called it pepper out of pure, wishful thinking. That pod was the chili, the very crop that would one day sail to India and become its national flavor. Columbus was hunting India's spice and accidentally handed India a new one. The man who actually found the root was Portuguese. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the bottom of Africa and reached the Indian coast at Calicut. The cargo from that first voyage, by some accounts, sold for as much as 60 times the entire cost of the expedition. 60 times. That single number turned a trade route into a target, and it turned a navigator into something much worse. Da Gama came back in 1502 with 20 warships and a different purpose entirely. Off the Indian coast, his fleet stopped a ship called the Miri, carrying hundreds of Muslim pilgrims home from Mecca, families among them. Da Gama had it looted, then ordered the passengers locked below deck and burned the ship to the waterline. Around 300 people, by some counts more than 400, died in that water, women and children among them, while his men rowed alongside and speared the survivors. One of da Gama's own men, an eyewitness, wrote that it was a day he would carry in horror for the rest of his life. Da Gama then turned his guns on the city of Calicut itself, bombarded it, hanged captured fishermen, and sent their severed hands ashore in a boat as a message. This was not a side effect of the spice trade. It was the strategy: control through terror. If this is the kind of history you want more of, take a second to subscribe. I follow one spice, one trade route, one buried atrocity like this every single week. Now, the Portuguese had the route, but the Dutch wanted the prize at the other end of it. And that brings me to the second open loop, the one about Manhattan. Further east, past India, lay a tiny cluster of islands called the Banda Islands. They were, at the time, the only place on Earth where nutmeg grew. Not the main source, the only source. A spice that cost almost nothing to pick on those islands could be sold in Amsterdam for hundreds of times the price, and its value roughly doubled every time it changed hands along the route. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company sent a governor named Jan Pieterszoon Cohen to take total control of that nutmeg. What he did is one of the coldest acts in the whole history of trade. He arrived with soldiers and mercenaries and effectively erased the population of the islands. The leaders were beheaded and quartered. Out of somewhere between 13 and 15,000 Bandanese, by the end only around 1,000 were left alive on the islands. An estimated 90% were killed, starved, enslaved, or driven off so that one company could own a spice outright. And here is the payoff. One of those Banda Islands, a speck of land called Run, was held for a while by the English. In 1667, England and the Dutch sat down to make peace and trade territory. The Dutch kept the nutmeg island of Run. In exchange, the English kept a swampy, unpromising little colony on the other side of the world called New Amsterdam. We know it today as Manhattan. New York City was, in a very real sense, the consolation prize for losing a nutmeg island. And at the time, plenty of people thought the Dutch had robbed them. That is what the spice trade did to the world. It made men trade Manhattan for the right to a single flavor. And India sat at the center of all of it, the gateway every one of these powers had to get through. Which brings me to the last and largest of them, the English. The East India Company was chartered on the final day of the year 1600, and it was founded first and above all to break into the spice trade. But it could not pry the Dutch off the nutmeg and clove islands, so it turned almost as a fallback to the Indian mainland. It came for spices, and it stayed to swallow a subcontinent. You have to understand what India was at this point. Around the year 1700, the Mughal Empire that ruled it was the richest state on the planet, producing something like a quarter of the entire world's economic output. The East India Company arrived as traders at the edge of the wealthiest empire on Earth. Within a few generations, it had its own private army, larger than the army of Britain itself. In 1757, at a place called Plassey, around 3,000 company soldiers defeated a Bengal army of 50,000, not by superior force, but by bribing the other side's commanders beforehand. With that one rigged battle, a trading company seized the tax rights to the richest provinces in India. A modern historian called what followed the single largest transfer of wealth until the Nazis. And in 1770 came the bill, paid by people who never tasted the profits. The rains failed in Bengal and the harvest with them. But the company did not ease its grip. It kept collecting its taxes. In places it actually raised them and kept exporting grain out of a starving province. By the count most often cited, around 10 million people died in that famine, roughly 1/3 of the population of Bengal. Even the most cautious historians put the dead in the millions. It is one of the deadliest famines in recorded history, and it grew at the root out of a hunt for spices. We are through the blood now. That is stage 2, and it leaves one question hanging over everything, which is stage 3, and the lie I promised you at the start. Why? Why did Europe do all of this? Bankrupt Rome, burn the Miri, erase the Banda, starve Bengal, all for what? You have almost certainly heard the answer. They needed the spices to cover the taste of rotten meat. It is a tidy story. It is also wrong on every single level. Start with the obvious. No amount of pepper makes spoiled meat safe. Spice it however you like, rotten meat will still poison you. If preservation was actually the goal, salt and vinegar were far cheaper and actually worked. But the real collapse of the myth is in the economics. Spices were absurdly expensive. In early 14th century England, a single pound of pepper, the cheapest spice on the shelf, cost about the same as an entire pig. Think about who could afford that. The only people who could buy spices were the wealthy, and the wealthy were exactly the people who already had access to fresh meat. The peasant buying cheap, turning meat at the end of the market day could never in his life have afforded the pepper to disguise it. The whole story is backwards. So what was the real reason? It was simpler and stranger than rot. Spices were a way to eat money in front of your guests, to prove you could command something that had crossed the entire known world to reach your table. They were medicine in a system that believed exotic heat could rebalance the body. And plainly, people loved the taste. That is it. The whole machine, the bankrupted empires, the burned pilgrims, the traded islands, the starved province, was built not on hiding bad food, but on status, belief, and pleasure. Human beings did all of that to one another over flavor. Which leaves the final thread, the one I asked you to hold from the very beginning. Is India still the spice king? By the raw numbers, completely. It still grows 75% of the world's spices. It is still the largest producer, the largest consumer, and the largest exporter, holding nearly the whole rack the way no other country on earth does. But here is the twist that history would find almost cruel. The one spice that started all of it, black pepper, the king, the thing Alaric demanded, and Rome went broke for, and Gama killed for, is no longer ruled by India at all. Today, the world's largest grower and exporter of black pepper is Vietnam, which now ships more than 40% of all the pepper that crosses the globe. India has slipped to a fraction of that on its own signature crop. And the reason is brutally simple. An Indian pepper farm yields, on average, around 400 kilograms a hectare. In Vietnam and Brazil, the same hectare yields more than 2,000. India grew the world's pepper for 3,000 years and got out-farmed in a single generation. It holds on at the top end with the prized Malabar and Telecherry grades that still command a premium. And it still reigns over the strangest, most expensive corner of the rack. In the mountains of Kashmir, saffron is harvested by hand, and it takes around 150,000 flowers to make a single kilogram, which is why it can sell for more than its weight in silver. India produces only a tiny sliver of the world's saffron. More than 90% comes from Iran. Even here, at the very top of the value of every spice on earth, India is no longer the one in control. So that is the whole answer. India became the spice capital of the world, not because it was hot and not to hide rotten meat. It became the spice capital because a wandering continent crashed into Asia and grew the only wild pepper on the planet, because one country ended up holding 15 climates at once, and because it sat at the crossroads where the wind delivered the rest of the world's spices to its shore. Geography handed one nation almost everything. And then, for 2,000 years, everyone else came to take it, and they were willing to bankrupt, burn, and bury whatever stood in the way. If this changed the way you see what's sitting in your spice rack right now, leave a comment and tell me which part you did not know. The pepper that has one wild home, the island traded for Manhattan, the famine behind the flavor. Subscribe, and next time I'll follow another one of these trails to wherever the bodies are buried.